Hi, everyone. I'm Gwen Smith, editor and content chief of Allergic Living. And I'm delighted to have as my guest today Lianne Mandelbaum. We're going to talk all about air travel with food allergies. You'll know Lianne for her tireless advocacy for food allergy accommodations on airlines. She's Allergic Living's airlines correspondent and the founder of the No Nut Traveler nonprofit. Welcome, Lianne. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on to talk about my favorite topic.
Excellent. Now, Leanne, we'll get into other airlines and allergies issues, but let's start with a positive. We're introducing the food allergy community to really a one-of-a-kind resource. It's Allergic Living's Airlines and Allergies Guide. It's a guide divided into two parts, domestic and international, and it covers 28 airlines and it's growing. Now, you were the main author and I was the co-author. So, why don't we give viewers some sense of what makes the airlines guide unique? Could you start us out?
Sure. I think there've been like other attempts at guides by mainstream media trying to like say if you have a food allergy, here are the airlines, but they really pretty much only copied and pasted off the airline's website, which doesn't really have the information that we need to make informed decisions to fly safely. So what we did, and I think is what makes allergic living special in general, is we did a deep dive because we understand what are the barriers. And so we understand what to write, what the information people really need. And with holiday travel coming up, I think it's going to be invaluable for people booking their flights. What kind of meals are served or not served? What kind of snacks are served? What are the emergency protocols? What kind of medication does the airline travel? What will they let you do to mitigate the risk? These are things that people need to know when they're doing their research, and they're not apparent. And sometimes they're not on the website. So even if you're diligently doing your homework and looking at the website, I sometimes had to bother is probably an understatement, the airline multiple times to get answers to simple yes and no questions. And oftentimes they would then answer a completely different question than I asked. And then, we would go back and forth. And sometimes it was like 4 or 5 times, sometimes it was more. And, it was a labor of love because I think our community really needs this. And I'm so proud that you and I worked on this together. And I really hope that it becomes an invaluable resource for anyone traveling with a food allergy, has a family member, a loved one, so that they also can make informed decisions.
Uh, I really hope that too. And it's funny because you talk about the having to go back to some of the airlines. That really struck me was the magnitude of this undertaking. It ended up taking us months and months and months, like a lot longer than you thought. But, it's just because both the airlines aren't prepared for some of these questions. They're not top of mind for them. But also they just, give some, not all. We had some that were very good, but others were
Yeah.
just evasive. So I was really pleased. I always say Leanne was a natural born reporter. She's got terrier-like instincts to go get those answers. But for the average person, just try to phone up and get responses. Like that's why I think this guide is so important, and I really do hope people will use it for that. It's really
I've used
kind
it
of striking.
myself,
Yeah.
even when I don't, when I've needed it and I haven't, it's a lot of information to keep in your head. And so it's really good to have that reference to go back and look at.
Now, from working on this guide, some things really sort of stood out. I can think of a few things. So I think I mentioned at the outset that we have both two parts to it, domestic, USA and Canada, and then international airlines. So I was quite struck by how many of the British airlines will make an announcement asking others to please refrain from eating nuts or peanuts. There just seems to be generally a bit more awareness in the UK among the airlines, and there seems to have been quite a bit of passion put into that. Unfortunately, we do have the example of the young girl Natasha Edna Laperouse, who lost her life on a plane. So that, definitely has, I hate to say it, but that sometimes a fatality will propel things forward. And her parents have been amazing advocates with the Natasha's Foundation. But that's one thing that struck me. Also, I don't think many people know, but with flights out of Canada, you can request a buffer zone. I don't know if that's something people particularly want, but hey, it's one of the accommodations. And I think also there was only one airline offering a top allergen-free meal, and that was Air France. But Air France isn't actually the friendliest or the most forthcoming,
No, no. In fact,
So,
no
what
traveler.
struck, yeah, talk about,
No, not traveler.
others.
Actually, I've had quite a few people actually asked to leave Air France when disclosing the allergy. So it's interesting that they offer that meal. There's sort of like a disconnect sometimes. But what really surprised me is that there are some airlines still serving peanuts, and Spirit happens to be one of them. And I didn't know that. I Because it's not an airline we fly, yet my son was doing the tennis circuit this summer and he was getting back from Texas to Florida, and that was the airline they were going to book. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure they still serve peanuts. And he's like, that's just not possible. So I went to the guide
These
and I
days,
took
it's
a
pretty
screenshot.
uncommon. Yeah.
It is. It is. I mean, there are still international airlines. Some of them do serve, but it is rare in the United States
Hmm.
for some reason. And maybe we'll talk about this later. Airlines seem to feel like if they've taken peanuts out of the lineup, so to speak, that they are allergy free, which I think just goes to show you how much more work we have to do on education. I don't think it's purposeful necessarily. I think that they truly don't understand that there are other allergens and they too can cause anaphylaxis. Um, but yeah, I was surprised. And so, yes, I did send him the screenshot. Now, look, it was the only flight that worked for him, that he could make this tournament and get back to where he had. So I made him promise, because he's older now and he goes on an airline that doesn't serve peanuts. He doesn't necessarily announce his presence because he feels pretty comfortable, especially if he's traveling with a couple of people that around him, no one's going to eat it. But, in this case, it was pretty certain that somebody could be eating it. So it was good. I texted him and he promised me that he told the flight crew and they didn't serve it to his row. They didn't make an announcement or anything, but they were aware of the allergy, and he was aware to be more careful than you should always be careful, but he was aware that, to look out for the things that were left by the previous person who sat in that seat, which is something, again, a lot of people don't understand, that why the pre-board is so important. And that
And
would go for any allergy, right? Any allergy.
yeah. And that's, just to know in advance what you're facing is part of it. I mean, with this guide, not everything is going to be, hey, these are so accommodating.
Right, right, right.
Sometimes it's to know what airlines won't offer as much as what they
Correct.
will offer. So, important to know before you jumped on that
Not
plane.
only important, I think what this guide does is put some of the power back in the allergic passenger, because you're not going on there blind and then finding out that American Airlines will not make an announcement for a tree nut allergy or take any precautions other than let you pre-board, which is your right in the United States. It's important to know that. And then if you've made that decision and you've come with your wipes and you've come with your own personal risk mitigation strategies, you've made that decision. And I think there's something powerful about that, as opposed to walking on scared, not sure what you're going to get. Now, you may very well get a very kind crew. And we say the only thing consistent about airlines is the inconsistency, right? As far as
Yeah.
food allergies. So you might get a crew that decides not to serve or do that. But that's not their policy. And it's important to know the policy so that you don't go on having expectations. Because I have spoken to countless people who are surprised when they get on, say, American with a tree nut allergy. And then don't realize that American will serve all around them. And nowhere in their policy do they say that they will do anything other than that. So it is important that we are informed. And if we make the decision to fly on that airline, we go there with the information of
Yeah.
what we need to do to keep ourselves safe.
Well, let's talk about pre-boarding. You've raised that a few times. And just to be clear for people, what we're talking about here is bringing your own wipes because you don't know who's been in the seat before you. And, especially things like evening flights, people could be snacking away on, well, all sorts of things. It could be everything from pretzels with wheat to, nuts and peanuts and things. So if that,
Cheetos,
what's that?
there's and Cheetos.
Doritos, all of them,
Yeah.
dust settling on
Yeah.
trays, etc.
What comes up must come down, you
Yes,
know?
we
Goes
even
up.
I even covered a while back a study from the Mayo Clinic where they found that there were actually with uh, peanuts on airline tray tables. There was more peanut dust there than there was on in restaurants that served peanuts. So that tells you something about the wipe down process. And when we talk about that wiping, we're talking about the tray table, the seat, the whatever. So that's why pre-boarding's important, right? Because it's not exactly easy to do when a whole flood of we all know what it's like when the flood of people is coming on the flight. It's not easy. So you want to be able to get the wiping down done. And we're fortunate now that tell us a little bit about that. That didn't used to be a right, but that is a right now.
I just want to bring up one other point that sometimes people don't think about with the pre-boarding is that oftentimes with limited overhead baggage space now, as a food allergic passenger, you often have your safe food and medications in your carry-on.
Yeah.
And if you get on last, you may have to gate check that. And I have taken testimonials of people who have had reactions in the air and where's the safe medication under the plane. So when you pre-board, you also make sure that your safe food and medication is with you. And if your luggage gets lost and that's where your safe food is, that's another problem. So yes, it didn't used to be that way. Um, I had been collecting testimonials very early in my advocacy, and I had noticed that American Airlines was denying specifically people with peanut allergies the right to pre-board an aircraft. And they actually put it in writing. They said that if you have a peanut allergy, you cannot pre-board. And
Yeah.
Mary Vargas and I were skulking away at a
That's
conference
Attorney
instead of
Mary Vargas, who does a lot of
yeah,
disability
disability
rights
rights.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in a corner and really skulking in the dark while people were like in a session. And I started telling her this, and she said, "I think that's a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act," which again, people think the ADA is valid in the air. It's not. It's the Air Carrier Access Act. And she said, "Send me every testimonial." And so I sent her every testimonial, and one of them caused the DOT ruling for a child with multiple food allergies, which was why she told me to send her every testimonial, right? We picked the case very, very carefully. And now anyone in the United States or flying into the United States has the right with a food allergy to pre-board an aircraft
And
to make their areas safer.
which is a
And
huge win. So,
it's a
when
huge,
we think there haven't been some accommodation advancements, there has been. And, honestly, thanks to you and Mary for pulling that forward. And I think FAIR at the time got on board with that too. Jen Jobrack was at FAIR at the time and was very
and
helpful.
no small part to Allergic Living,
Our coverage,
covering
yeah.
all the issues of people who weren't pre-boarding when it wasn't allowed, and the coverage of the cases and the testimonials and the stories of when people were turned down.
Yeah.
So, it takes a village, and
It
it's
does. And I even have the experience to share of having an in-flight reaction. And what do I attribute that to? That was a time I was coming back home from Florida and I'd forgotten the wipes in the hotel room. And so I get there and I don't have wipes. So I sit down and I'm eating my food, but there were a lot of peanuts and things around. Peanuts are among my allergies. I think it was probably that. But I ate my own food and I was fortunate that the reaction only came on as we were landing. But let me tell you, I do not recommend having an anaphylactic reaction and having to go straight to the hospital, afterward because it was biphasic. So, I mean, I've had that experience and I'm a convert now, wipes pre-board. So,
Let me wear my hat just for a second. And so did you report this reaction to anybody on the plane? Did
no,
anyone
of
know you had?
course not, because here's why.
No, I
I
don't want to know the why. I don't want to know the why.
No, I
What I want,
didn't because I was still in a bad state.
yeah, but my point is to our listeners that
You got to
when
report it.
people start telling you that the numbers are low of allergic reactions in the air, you've got to realize that so many of these reactions are just not captured. And when you have an editor of Allergic Living and she's not
I
making
know.
sure that it goes in, it's not music to my heart, but it makes me
Yeah,
feel validated for
I would
for
now.
what
I've
we
learned.
talk about.
That was a while
Yeah,
ago. So, yeah.
yeah. I'm just saying it makes me feel validated because I feel like a lot of these reactions still are not being captured, and we
It's
have
hard
to
to
kind of,
know. We don't, we do depend on data, and I have a much better understanding of how that important that is
yeah.
now. But listen, while we've discussed pre-boarding,
Sorry to digress.
yeah, no, no, not at all. It's a really good point, and we've got to capture these things. But in the news, we have heard something that's been very disheartening for people who have tree nut allergies, and that is that Southwest, who in 2018 they decided they'd been known as kind of the peanut carrying airline. They had been very good about allowing you to let them know, and they would control. They had measures to not serve peanuts, etc. But they finally did away with serving peanuts in 2018, and then they very purposely didn't sell tree nuts either, so that they were kind of a go-to they'd become for numbers of people with peanut and tree nut allergies. And they tend to be affordable. A lot of college students use them. So just recently they announced, oh, wonderful, we're introducing pistachios in January. And there have been many people very worried about this and saying, I'm canceling my flights, et cetera, et cetera. But again, this shows why the airlines guide is also important. We not only did we cover that news, you wrote the article for us, but we're also updating that living document, the airlines guide, to make that clear. So, do you want to just say something more on that whole situation and how it
I,
unfolded?
I found it so striking because when I went back, the moment I heard the news, I went back to my email where I had asked the questions of the Southwest representative, all the questions for the guides. What snacks do you serve? What emergency protocols do you
Mhm.
have? And they specifically said that we only serve light snacks, but none of them have nuts. And so they made a point of saying that. And my question wasn't about nuts. That's why I'm bringing that up, right? We just want to know what the snacks are. And we want to know all allergens. I mean, we ask questions. I know people think that a lot of our answers in this guide relate to peanut and tree nut. That's not because we only asked about peanut and tree nut. That may be because after about 10 tries and the airline won't answer anything else, that's what you have. That's what they have. That's their policy. And that's the information we got out of them. Believe me, we tried. But it really struck me that they made a point of saying that they didn't serve any snacks with nuts. And then they turned around almost as if they didn't believe a pistachio was a nut. It was just really, I was like, even in my head now, I'm thinking, do they know pistachios are a nut? And so then I'm like, okay, well, they had a very good policy with peanuts and yet still reactions took place because I was hearing about them on No Nut Traveler. And then after they took the peanuts off, I wasn't hearing about it anymore. I don't think we've covered a story about a peanut reaction on Southwest since they stopped serving. And one would think they would see. We didn't serve this top allergen and we don't see reactions, right? So why play the same game again? It's mind-boggling to me. And I think that a lot of people did rely on Southwest for not having served them, but also when they did serve the peanuts, they had a policy that they would, announce to the plane. They would let you get on early, even before the pre-board was a right. They let you pre-board, and they didn't serve it. And so I asked what they would do because one of my followers on No Nut Traveler, when I posted the Allergic Living article, they said, well, I called up Southwest and they told me on my flight in January, they will make an announcement and they won't serve it on my flight. And so I asked them, is when I was writing the article for Allergic Living, is this policy or is this something that someone just said to one person? And they referred back to the only statement that they gave me, which was that if you have a tree nut allergy, you can pick an alternate snack.
I know.
So
That's like,
that
this isn't
just,
what we're talking about, right? I mean, this
oh,
isn't, nobody in the allergy community is saying, oh gosh, what snack can you give me? It's about,
well,
I
there
just
might
don't
be
want to
some,
be
but
surrounded. Yeah.
yeah. No, I mean it's absurd, and it just goes to show you we have come so far. I mean, when I started, and you and I talked about this issue, we didn't have the right to pre-board. I don't think airline travel and food allergies were anywhere near the mainstream media. And now you see us covering it and them picking it up afterwards. So I think we've made a lot of progress. But where I think the progress still needs to be made is the education piece. Towards the airlines, what a food allergy is, what foods can cause a food allergy, how all food allergies can be anaphylactic. Tree nuts and peanuts are sticky. There was a British medical journal study, and they talked about the stickiness and persistence on trays. I mean, it's not just peanut. So I'm so confused as to um, the why of this decision,
Well, I
given what they
wonder, there's a part of me that really wonders. There's been such an outpouring, and people have been writing to them and certainly writing on their social posts. So I kind of wonder whether they may take this one sponsorship, but keep it short and reconsider.
maybe
You
at a
know,
minimum, I'm hoping that they take all the feedback and the article we wrote and give some real thought to, at a minimum, having a fair policy to mitigate the risk of flying them when you do have a
hmm.
pistachio allergy. Because what I worry about, of course, there are people who are saying, I'm not flying with them again, I'm going to cancel. But then
Right.
I think back on it's two-pronged for me. I think back to my son this summer, and he didn't care that they were serving peanuts. This was the airline that got him from Florida training to Texas for this. None of the other airlines actually did it in the time that he needed. So there's that. There can be people with business meetings. I transfer this to business meetings, making a
Hmm.
funeral. It's not always in your ability to choose a different airline when you need to be on a time constraint. And then I think about the affordability, whereas, people don't book holiday vacations or children's college flights home or sports events. They don't book them a week before. They
No, they
often book
booked them long
them
in advance.
in
Yeah.
advance, and they may have financial constraints. And now that family is faced with, do I put myself in the hole to get them home on a different airline? Or I think from an equity point of view, it's really startling, scary. I feel for people because I feel like they've been put in a squeeze because they relied on Southwest not serving nuts.
Well, Leanne, reactions do happen in the skies. We've covered many of them, and you've done a lot of those articles. I've done some of them. So, we do have to generally be looking out for, what is the airline we're picking? What can we do to minimize and do our part in pre-board and wipe down whatever our allergens. So I think it's really important. But I think among the coverage that you've done too is the surprise of sometimes finding that either people aren't always carrying their epinephrine with them, or they've packed it, or, we had, I think, one case where a student went on a different flight than her parents and ended up without her epi. Like, these things can happen. So it's also really important. I really appreciate your advocacy and your questions on the epinephrine in the kits, and trying to get them not to just have the vials, which are sometimes hard to find. We've had all sorts of stories from allergists on that. We've had, what one allergist told you, that she talked about kind of crowdsourcing on a plane, trying to find somebody who had epinephrine, which
One
is hard to
allergist,
do, right?
I would say we've had several. Remember,
Yeah,
Kelly Hopkins wasn't an allergist; she was a
that's right. She
helicopter,
was a nurse. Yeah,
and she was a helicopter nurse, and yet she didn't feel comfortable taking the time to titrate the adult allergic concentration into pediatric because she thought the child who was having a first time reaction to cashew would not have made it if she had not gotten that crowdsourced epinephrine. So yeah, and I also think our listeners, where I think we can add value to this conversation, is that I come across people saying, "Well, carry your own auto injector. This is something I don't have to worry about. My kid will always have it." That's like really nice to say, but we've all messed up. Daily life is fraught with errors. They're just not usually fatal. But you get someplace and your wallet's at home. You left your driver's license at home. You took the different pocketbook. I mean, to be human is to err. And I think that until you have a fatal mistake happen, which has happened to people that we've interviewed, right?
hmm,
It's the coverage you just did on the cashew, which by the way is cross-reactive with the pistachio,
very
something that
much
came out.
so. Yeah, yeah. That
Right?
was a young man. It's a story of a young guy who was a hockey goalie, and his mother said he always carried his epinephrine. And when she got home from the tournament that he didn't make it back from, she saw his EpiPen sitting out, ready to pack. So he obviously had just forgotten it. But those are the sad stories. Fortunately, they're not everything's
No,
a
but
fatality. I
my my
Yeah, go ahead.
point in that is that we all need to be worried that airlines are carrying the right medications
Absolutely.
because even
You
if you have a
got to be
known
ready.
food allergy, you
Yeah,
could put it under the plane. You could be like that one child that they went on separate planes and the parents took it with them and she had the anaphylaxis on a flight to Italy. It happens. We all need backup and we should all support it. And it is very important advocacy.
and I can say from my own experience, like, lots of times anaphylaxis, thankfully, is most of the time not fatal. But
Right.
it is no way to start your holiday having to go to
No,
the hospital and then get that kind of feeling of fearing your food, etc. So
right, right,
nobody
right.
wants to go there if you can possibly avoid it. So we want to take care. And again, just to come back to our guide, I really hope that people will check out our airlines and allergies guide. And we've got the two parts, domestic and international. And also, Lianne has just added a little sidebar that you'll see there on the domestic guide about pre-boarding, so that you can get some more information on that. Lianne, as we wrap up, any last words you want to say?
I almost would even carry the guide as a PDF potentially on your phone because oftentimes airline staff don't know their own policies. It's not just a wonderful resource for you to use as research. Instead of having an argument, you can say, well, look, this is your policy. This is published. So I think that it could be very worthy in that sense. Share it with other people in the food allergy community who may not be aware of its existence. Tell your physician about it because the one thing we didn't talk about, Gwen, and so I guess I have to end on it because it's become even more than my airlines are consistently inconsistent tagline. Don't take the airline meal. Okay,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
a risk we can eliminate. And you will see on our guide that even if an airline says we have X type of meal, you will see that they all have huge disclaimers. Why do they have huge disclaimers? Because these catering companies are in huge kitchens. You have no idea if that cutting board that made your grilled cheese is literally on top of something that hasn't been cleaned off that had tree nuts, peanuts, sesame. I could go any top allergen that could be on there. I recalls happen, mistakes happen, labeling. I encourage you to go back, and we linked to it in the guide. I did an investigative report on this where the FDA told me that they encourage transparency, but they don't require it. Labeling laws in the air are different than they are on the ground. Most physicians don't know it. So most patients don't know it. And it's really important that we control the risks that we can. And one of those things is doing the research, which we hope our chart will help, and not taking the airline meal, trying to remember to bring your medication always, trying to remember to get on the plane early so you don't put it under the plane. Um, I think we've done a good job of trying to empower people, don't you, Gwen?
I hope so, I think so. And now they just have to use it. And we always welcome stories if people come into other situations or they come across an airline that seems that we haven't talked about or somebody's doing
Talked
something
about
that's
adding
now more
some, haven't we?
accommodating. Let us know.
Yeah, we've talked about adding some. So we will add at
Yeah,
specific periods, we'll add some here and there. When I tell you this took years to happen, it took years to happen for a
yeah.
reason. It was very difficult, very challenging. We were both persistent. And, Gwen would say, well, you got this answer out of them, but can you go back and ask that? I'm
I
like,
know that's the
again.
editor chip in me.
And
Anyway,
then I would go
Lee,
back
yeah, and you would go
and get the
back, but you
answer.
did sometimes get them. So it's
Yeah, well,
all
that's what I'm
good.
saying. Like you would say, this is an answer, but I still don't like this. Go and get them to clarify it. So that's where you pushed me for this to be a better version of what it is. And that's why I think you'll see that it's more in depth than anything else that's out there.
Lianne, my friend and colleague, thank you so much for all your hard work on this and for your passion, your energy, and tireless work to get us better accommodations and that consistency among the airlines that we're still both really looking for and pushing for.
Yes. Thank you.